Well, kia ora Netball Scoop whānau, and welcome back to the Netball Scoop YouTube channel. My name is Toby, and in today's episode, I know we're a little bit late, but we're also doing a little bit of a lead-in for a new series coming up. We will be talking about that Constellation Cup series, and what a series it was. I think we previewed it. We didn't really know how it was going to go. It could have been a complete sweep by one side. The dramas could have been all over the place for another, and it ended up being one of the closest battles we've seen in the tournament's history. So, Georgia, what were your thoughts on the series as a whole?
I mean, I was pretty upfront when we did our preview a couple of weeks ago that I thought the Aussies were going to be fairly dominant, going and winning it 3-1. Obviously, that's not how it played out. It ended up being 2-2 with the Aussies coming away with it by only one goal in that series decider. And I even think after those first two games, most Aussie fans were fairly confident that even though we traditionally haven't played very well when we cross the ditch to play over in New Zealand, that with such significant winning margins from those first two games that we were pretty set. So I know I was really pleased when New Zealand came out and actually won that third test just because it makes it a little bit more exciting. When they won the fourth test, I wasn't quite as impressed. Would have been happy for us to wrap it up after that one and not have to go into the series decider time. But no, I think definitely one for the ages in terms of competitive battles, seeing the difference in both teams on either side of the ditch when obviously the Aussies played their first couple of tests at home and then the Kiwis had theirs on home turf, and that obviously all happened after the Dame Nolin Tarua news as well, that she'd been reinstated. So I certainly think that invigorated them. But yeah, overall, just a fantastic series, minus the fact that obviously right at the end of the that series decider time over in New Zealand Sunday, Ariang went down with that really unfortunate knee injury, which I know certainly put a dampener on the series, not only for people watching at home, but the teams in particular.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great way to kind of lead in for that first test. I think if we're going to dive straight in, I think as we said in our preview, we were kind of unknown as to what was going to be the result. I think you'd seen Australia look so strong in that first test, in that South Africa series, sorry, and they just got better and better when the New Zealand side kind of were getting worse and worse. And I think you saw that form in the end up kind of translating in that test one. It was at John Cain Arena, and it was a 69-52 thrashing by the Diamonds. And I think for me personally, the thing that I kind of saw was Australia just had combinations and they worked well, they gelled, where New Zealand were kind of just throwing anything out there to kind of see what was maybe going to work. And we all know that unity is kind of the name of the game in netball. So seeing that mostly, I think it was every player except Georgia Heffernan actually went on in that first test, it just showed that they were lacking experience, not only on the court, but potentially with the chemistry and the coaches knowing exactly what to do with the players. But what were kind of some things that you saw as like the main highlights of that test one?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna jump not necessarily to a highlight first, but just sort of lead into what you mentioned there about the coaches not necessarily, knowing what to do, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
The first half of the game was really, really close. There was only a really small margin at half time. And in that third quarter is when Yvette started making some of those changes, and that's really when it started to sort of lean in the Aussies' favour. And I think some of that potentially comes down to the fact that she obviously hasn't had that really long period of established time with those Ferns players. She's not as familiar with how they come on the court, what sort of impact they're going to be able to offer, what combinations can work under pressure, how they match up against specific Australian players, just because she hasn't had the
Mm,
length of time with them. Versus as it got to that sort of third and fourth test, when she'd obviously had that bit more time with them in general, but also had the chance to see how they played out against the Aussies, it was then clear that she was able to make a lot better decisions. Again, sounds a bit harsh, but she was able to, yeah, make better choices around who could come on and have the impact that she wanted. So I think that was certainly a big thing. In terms of
mm.
highlights, I think really hard to go past Kate Maloney. I thought she was stitched up not to end up with player of the series. I'll probably chat a bit more about that later. But she had, full game in centre, 22 goal assists, 34 feeds, and not a single turnover.
Yeah.
At an international level game against a quality team like New Zealand, that's just unreal. Obviously, yes, she's got that established connection of playing with Sophie Garben and Kira Austin at the Vixens, and then obviously years of playing with Liz, who spent most of the game at wing attack. But I still think to be in such a high pressure game, even though it was only the first one of the series, as we know, Constellation Cup always has so much riding on it. I think she was a clear standout, not only in that game, across the rest of the series. And I think it was also good again to see the Aussies got all their players out on court, even though a few of them only got a few little cameos right at the end. They sort of stuck with that starting lineup for, it was probably about 52 minutes of the game, I think it was.
Mm,
And sort of got the others out there for a little bit of a taste right at the end, which I think was really good to see.
yeah, for me personally, I think I remember watching that fourth quarter, and it was I know this is harsh. I always say things that are harsh, but it was almost embarrassing watching it. I think you've seen the first three quarters, it was a pretty good contest. I think New Zealand, you could see on attack that they were making a lot of errors still, but they were generating enough turnover ball on the other side that it could kind of like counteract or at least keep them within a margin that made them look better than what they were actually playing. And I think that fourth quarter was actually a demonstration of how they were playing in that game. 24-11, that's just unacceptable. And I think you can see with the changes they ended up making, like Martina Salmon at goal attack, I think she was so strong during that South Africa series and then that test one first minute in gets blocked by Courtney Bruce, and you could see that she needed some more time to get confident in playing against Australia. And then Amelia Walmsley into goal attack. I think she wasn't as strong during that test one either. Um, yeah, it was disappointing. But I think watching Australia, they were just slick. I really liked, as you said, Kate Maloney was a great player in that game. But I think also Courtney Bruce was just completely decimated Grace Nweki in that game, and she was really confident. And not as the big Diamonds fan or Bruce fan, I think, but I think she just played amazing. You couldn't take your eyes off what she was kind of doing, not only when she was going for interceptions or generating that turnover ball, but the off the ball work I think was outstanding in Test One from Courtney Bruce.
Yeah, I think, the both of the defensive circles for both the Diamonds and the Ferns are so potent. And I think one of the big differences in that first game, like you said, the Ferns were still getting a fair bit of turnover, but
Mm,
there was a lot of penalties. The combination of Berger and Jackson had 38 penalties between them versus the two circle defenders for the Diamonds only had 24. So that's a significant difference, and especially when you're looking at a team like the Aussies, they always are using their ball speed and their quick movements and their triangles and all that sort of stuff to open things up, which
mm.
when playing against a bit more of a zone style defense where you need that time to set up like the Ferns do, it just means they end up getting caught behind, coming through late. And if they're going for those flies, they might end up collecting the body on the way through. So I think that certainly worked in the Aussies' favour. But then as the tests progressed, the Kiwis found a way to work through that. And I think that was potentially a bit of Australia's downfall in the last couple of tests, which was, we'd run that Garben Austin combo for such significant minutes early on that you
Mm.
guys had a really good chance to have a look at it, figure it out, and figure out how to beat it. And then we didn't necessarily have a super strong second option to be able to go to in those later tests.
Well, I think that's actually a good transition into the second test. It was down at Kudos Bank Arena, another thrashing by the Diamonds once again, 68-51. Pretty similar score differential, only one goal difference, I believe, in terms of, what was
Mhm.
it? Yeah, it was, oh no, it was the exact same, 17 goals per
Exact same,
test.
yeah.
So watching test two as well, I think you could see that New Zealand were slightly figuring out what to do again as well. I think they were almost a trial games, which is horrible to even think about now on reflection. But you look at the quarter score lines, Australia pretty much decimated for three of the quarters, and then they had a random blip during quarter two where New Zealand won 15-11 to kind of crawl back in. And speaking of that defensive structure, I think one of the main things I think we have heard in other podcasts, but also in interviews, where they were running a more Australian-like defensive structure to
Mhm.
try and combat Sophie and Kira, which I guess in terms of trying to provide something different, especially after the decimation of 2024 Con Cup, where They played very similar starting sevens for three tests the New Zealand team, and then they went into test four, and then they got absolutely decimated. Maybe they thought that playing something slightly different would have given them a little bit of an edge, but I think playing that one-on-one style that New Zealand's not necessarily known as much for didn't give them any favors, and you could see that they were a bit all over the place in terms of trying to keep up with the Australians, who was so fit this series. I think that's one of the main takeaways that, despite going losing those last two tests, you saw, spoiler alert, as we head into that fifth test, which I don't actually know what series decider time, I think they're calling it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, the series
the
decider.
the team that was going to win was going to be who was going to be the fitter team out of in the end. And I think you saw that in those first two tests. Australia was so fit. They knew exactly what to do to make the New Zealand team make turnovers. I think just looking at the stats, it was 19 turnovers to the Silver Ferns versus 10 to the Diamonds. That's like that should not be happening at an international game where you are making nearly 20 turnovers and your opposition is making nine less than you. So that's like 18 goals basically that you've just given to the Diamonds right there. So what were your observations then, I guess, from test one to test two? It was a pretty similar affair, but what do you think could have been some different highlights or something that you picked up where you saw maybe why we saw the results we saw in test three and four?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one, not necessarily then leads into the results for test three and four, but was the rebounding for the Australians,
Mm,
or the lack of rebounding for the Kiwis was probably a
yeah,
better way
it was
to
terrible.
put it. The height, Sophie Garvin is not a tall goal shooter.
No.
She's like 183 or 186 centimeters or something, and Kelly Jackson's 190 plus. There is absolutely no excuses for Kelly Jackson not getting rebounds over Sophie Garvin. Defenders already have a positional advantage in terms of that, classic turn and block that you get taught as a kid.
Mm.
She should be really in each one of those rebounds. Georgie Horgis was getting rebounds over
She
Kelly
got
Jackson.
three. She got
That's
three
embarrassing for Kelly.
rebounds.
I'm sorry.
I know. I looked at the stats and I was like, how did Georgie Horgis get three rebounds and the entire New Zealand defensive end got two?
Yeah.
That is
Um,
unbelievable. It's crazy. And to think that, because Georgie Horgis is 172, I believe, is that right?
yeah. Yeah.
Or even shorter than that. Like, and Kelly Jackson, as you mentioned, 192, that's 20 centimeter difference. And it's all down to the positioning of them in the circle, which you can just tell that clearly the Ferns had no idea what they were doing. Together, individually, they had no idea they were lost. And that's when you
Mm.
need a strong leader to get you through. And I guess they're trialing, new captains, new coaches for this series. And I think that was one of because they've got the talent. I think we talked about this in the preview. We talked about this plenty of times. They've got some of the world's best talent. They just weren't clicking at all, and it was embarrassing to watch.
Yeah, and I think with the Aussie shooting circle, obviously we know that last year in the Constellation Cup, Kira Austin struggled a fair bit with the big lean of Kelly Jackson. You could
Hmm.
certainly tell this series there was a significant effort from Garvin. Any opportunity she could was to get in front of Jackson when
Yeah.
Kip was lining up for a shot, provide that bit of extra protection. And then I know with a lot of talk about Georgie Horgis coming in as well, as we've mentioned, she's definitely on the shorter side for a goal attack. So there have been some concerns about her at the international level being able to hold up against those tall goalkeepers and tall goal defenders. And I think her
Yeah.
accuracy certainly wasn't impressive. I'm sure she would have wanted it to be higher. She sat at 13 from 18, but she ended up with no general play turnovers against her name, which, to my understanding from the champion data stats, means that none of those missed shots actually ended up in the Ferns' hands. So that
Mm.
means they were either rebounded by her or Garvin, or something happened that basically it ended up back with the Aussies. And while that's not something you want to be relying on, you want the shots to be going in, but it certainly gave New Zealand plenty of opportunities to get ball back that they just didn't take, which is what would have led to that bit more of a margin. Versus in the third and fourth games, they were a little bit more on top of those. And I do think I don't think I heard it directly on the Australian broadcast because I think this was an interview that only got done on the New Zealand one, but I think it was Liana Leota said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, we just weren't ex we don't expect the Aussies to miss that much, so we weren't sort of prepared to need to be rebounding." I'm sorry. Like, what do you mean you
Yeah.
weren't prepared to rebound? Like that's, like I said earlier, defending 101, your defender your shooter shoots the ball, you turn and block, whether you're playing against a Janil Fowler-Nemard, Susie down at the courts on a Saturday morning. Like that's
Mm.
what you do as a defender, no matter what level you're playing at. You turn and block prepared for the rebound, whether you're expecting it to be coming or not.
Yeah, and I totally I guess that comment comes out of hand in terms of like obviously it was a joke, I believe, I hope.
You'd
But
hope.
after two 17 goal losses, I would have probably wouldn't as
Not
a
made the joke.
yeah would not have made the joke. I mean, in terms of like especially like I guess it's like Kiwi humor, but yeah, it was
Mm.
just wrong timing. And especially like as you mentioned before, I'd like to make one comment before we wrap up the Australian side. The penalty count, I think Test 1, as I'm seeing here, it was 69 Silver Ferns to 56 the Diamonds. In Test 2, it was 71 to the Silver Ferns to 52 the Diamonds. And you go, right, they were completely played off the court. They were penalized too often. They weren't getting any rebounds. And so realistically, the defense end needed to kind of step up, or their officiating might have slightly changed as we went into Test 3 in New Zealand, which I think has been kind of a big discussion point as to how, with the same three referees, the umpiring and penalty count went from the Ferns were being completely played off the court to then all of a sudden going over to New Zealand, and the Silver Ferns only made 45 to Australia's 64. So that's like a complete sharp change in terms of that kind of stat. But you look at the end result, Test 3 was at Globox Arena in Hamilton, 61-52. And you could see that New Zealand were a little bit more confident in attack, but I don't think it was that starkly different. Like it wasn't like a drastic leap in that first half that would have seen them be like by far and away the winners of this test. You could see that Australia almost were kind of played. There must have been some sort of discussion in the background to be like Australia is maybe getting away with some stuff, or the assessors or something were saying we need to make sure that the penalty count is a bit more. I don't know because when I say it, it makes it sound like I'm biased and being like they're getting penalty too much, but or New Zealand was getting penalized too much, or Australia wasn't getting penalized enough. I don't know what the actual discussion is around that, but yeah, New Zealand ended up winning that test 61-52 in test 3, and I guess maybe I'll allow you to maybe discuss a little bit more. What were your thoughts on this sharp change in the umpiring?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, such a significant difference, even though there was that same pool of three umpires.
Mm,
Often you might see that if there's a significant change in personnel, in terms
correct.
of the on court, whereas the Diamonds pretty much ran with Courtney and Sunday for the whole series. Couple
Yeah.
little cameos from Clow, especially in that third test when the Ferns were running with Walmsley at goal attack.
Yeah.
Clow was brought on to goal defence to sort of have a bit more of a height non-mismatch, keep the height
Yeah.
even, two of them. And then I can't remember exactly, but I know it seemed in the later tests, so a lot of the New Zealand ones, there tended to be more of that combination of Jackson and Hall in the circle with then Berger out at wing defence.
Which sorry, I have to interrupt. I loved that
Yes,
combination. I
I
think,
thought you would.
yeah, I think I suggested it in the preview that they should have brought her on, but obviously I think I suggested Jackson to go to goal defense. But I think
Mm,
with how Hall played, she was just fearless, and it was like the tall timbers that I've always wanted in that defensive circle. And seeing Maddie change to go from center to then a defensive wing attack as well.
mm,
I think it really brought back like New Zealand Ferns play back in the day where it was like they were seven defenders on court. I don't think we'd seen that from them in a very long time. So before you can continue talking, I just wanted to mention that point of I think it was really cool to kind of see that coming because I think that is the future lineup of the Ferns
mm.
for a very long time.
Yeah, I think that that tall defensive circle worked really well, and it didn't seem to like it lost any of that speed. Often, when you move a taller a taller player out to goal defense, like when the Aussies do it with Sarah Clow, you lose a lot of
Mm,
that speed and sort of ability
correct.
to but it didn't feel like the New Zealand team lost that when they took Hall out to goal defence. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing it did really well for them was, particularly in those first two tests, whenever there was Berger in the circle, the Aussies did a really good job of being able to keep that movement going well enough so that then you ended up with Garvin on Berger. And that's an easy height mismatch. Ball goes over to Garvin, bang, easy goal under the post. Whereas when you had Hall in there, even if there was that positional switch and Garvin ended up on the goal defence, the
Mm,
ball couldn't go in as easily
100%.
because there was just that extra bit of height in there. So I think that was a really smart move from them. And it also meant that you still had that dogged, tenacious ability of Berger out at wing defence. And then I actually really liked when they shifted Kate Heffernan into centre as well.
100%.
Even when she was at wing defence at the start of that game, I think in the first quarter she had more feeds than the wing attack,
Yeah.
which for wing defence is just
Mhm.
criminal.
Yeah.
What's your literally, if you look at the wing attack job description, I'd say number one job is either going to be your centre pass receives or goal assists. And yeah, the fact that your wing defence was leading your goal assists is just wild. So I feel like her moving into centre, which then, as you also mentioned, allowed Maddie Gordon to push into wing attack. I think that's probably the lineup that they need to look at working with.
Yeah.
And it's then just a matter of what they do with that goal attack position. Out of all of the players that took the court across the series, I think Georgia Heffernan is probably the one that they need to invest the most time in. I just think she's got that almost elusiveness, I guess, to her. She's that
Mm,
bit smoother, bit silkier with her movement, but is still able to get in and enter the circle and take that pressure off Grace. Amelia Walmsley did a lot better at goal attack in this game than she did in the first match when she came on.
yeah.
But the one thing that I think she'll need to work on if she does really want to become a valid goal attack option for them is those long range shots. As we know,
Yeah.
she's a predominant goal shooter who's a lot more confident shooting under the post, as you would be when you're 6'4".
Mm,
So you can't really blame her for that, but you could certainly tell anytime she was lining up for shots from range, because she does have quite a predictable motion of her shot, it
yeah.
was very easy for the defenders to be able to sort of hedge their bets and go for those blocks, which, as we know, Courtney Bruce absolutely loves.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, on that discussion, I think if Ikanasio comes back, she has a pretty easy place to kind of slot back into, which is nice. And I think especially like with Tapaya as well, going to the Firebirds in Suncorp as well, she'll also potentially elevate her level, which she was the premier goal attack in the ANZ this year. So that would just be amazing for New Zealand's chances if she decides she wants to return back to the international. Who knows? But with the three that we kind of saw, I think the best way to play them was how they did it in test 3 and 4, which is kind of alternate between the three, giving them each like 15, 20 minutes each to kind of just create some, variation, some difference. And, it kept the Diamonds guessing, I think, as well, especially with even though in Test 3 they did alternate all the 12 quite commonly, I think it was just the changes were just a lot better. They seemed a bit more strategic rather than reactionary to why they were losing. It was strategic to get more goals and win the game. So I think that was the interesting point, and I think that quarter three, having Amelia Walmsley in that goal attack position, but also shifting everyone up as we have just spoken about, I think was just a great mastermind in the end of Yvette. It was very, very strong. Less turnovers, generated a lot more turnover ball for themselves, and I think as well as you mentioned about the body, the having the two tall timbers in there. I think as well as you mentioned for test two, when they blocked out Kelly, it kept Cutton almost looking like she didn't know how to jump the shot or didn't know how to. I think Australia figured out if Cutton's in the circle, put her on Sophie, and Sophie's going to win the ball 100% of the time. And it was very obvious she could barely challenge her. Sophie was so strong this series. And I think, yeah, having Catherine in there, you block out Kelly, and then you're like, well, I've still got a 1.91 or 1.92 defender that can still deflect and block the shot. As we saw, there was a sequence where there was like three block shots in a row. That's just like mentally traumatizing, I think, for them to try and figure out how to then defeat that. I think is going to be their next challenge, which is kind of exciting. But yeah, I think yeah, Test three, New Zealand definitely looked a lot stronger. I wouldn't say Australia looked a lot worse, in my opinion, either. To kind of, I think just New Zealand actually came to the game and played their what they're known for, which is zone defense, which is making good changes and also kind of a bit more strategic, which was nice. And then we go into that test four at Wolfbrook Arena, which kind of seems to be a bit of a kryptonite place for the Diamonds, especially because most of their New Zealand losses end up happening at Wolfbrook Arena, especially after that COVID series. Um, they looked pretty strong. I mean, for 2.5 quarters, the Diamonds looked like they were going to win that by far. And it was traumatizing for all New Zealand fans, I believe. You could even hear the crowd was very much quiet. But then once again, the Silver Ferns brought took Mila really Buchanan off from wing attack and put Gordon into wing attack, brought Catherine Hall into goal defense and put Kartenberger into wing defense. And once again, they just absolutely smashed that third and fourth quarter. Um, but I would be interested to hear from you, just a different kind of question rather than summarizing up that game to begin with. Why do you think the Silver Ferns ended up playing Mila Rielu Buchanan in all four tests, and she didn't necessarily seem to have the same impact as not only, Maddie Gordon at wing attack, but I also think Camille Poi was probably a stronger choice in that position as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was literally just about to mention that when you threw over to me, regardless of whether you brought it up or not.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, as an Aussie, I was glad every time I saw her on the starting list.
Yeah. I think the
Um,
thing, when I was thinking about it, I guess it was to provide Jamie Lee something a little bit different, but Jamie Lee figured her out every time. So it
yeah.
almost like Maddie, in my opinion, I feel like Maddie Gordon has kind of become Jamie Lee's kryptonite a little bit. You could see whenever they played against each other, Maddie was always going to win the drive or, get the ball. And the physicality of Jamie Lee didn't necessarily affect her as much because she's got that speed and IQ and
Mm.
stuff. So I do find that kind of choice interesting. But maybe as an Australian, I'd love to hear what you thought about it.
Yeah, I certainly think Maddie Gordon's probably one of the few international mid-quarters out there at the moment that's got the ability to challenge Jamie Lee in that sort of physicality
Mm,
aspect, not only in the speed, but just the brute force, again, for want of a better word. I feel like I'm always saying that. But yeah, I
mhm,
just feel like she's got the strong body, the ability to contest in the air, that real just sort of dogged, will do anything to get the ball nature. So it's a bit of a shame we didn't get to see them match up at centre at all and sort of have the whole
mm,
run of the court. I'm really looking forward to seeing that in the Super Netball next year. But yeah, Mila for me just didn't quite have the same sort of punch and drive. I think Jamie Lee was really able to shut her down for the majority of the games. As I mentioned for that test three, Mila started a wing attack. I think she had two or three goal assists by the end of that first quarter, while Kate Heffernan from wing defense had about five. Just because Jamie was covering every single one of her leads, making it really hard for her to get to circle edge.
mm,
And she seemed to have a little bit of hesitancy in feeding into Grace as well, which when you've got someone like Grace standing at the back of the court, you should just be firing it in from anywhere and everywhere,
yeah,
knowing that 99 times out of 100, she's going to be able to reel it in.
yeah,
So yeah, I think one of the things I've written in my notes for mainly test three, but it covers here as well, is Maddie Gordon at the moment is probably their best option in centre and wing attack. So
yeah,
you've got to find, is it going to be easier to put her in wing attack and find someone that can cover that centre, like a Kimura Poi or a Georgia Heffernan, or not Georgia Heffernan, sorry, Kate Heffernan, and
yeah,
push everybody forward? Or do you stick Gordon in centre and find someone for that wing attack like a Kimura Poi? Or someone we haven't talked about at all yet is Peta Toyaba, who lots of people have obviously been calling for more time in the black dress.
mm,
Especially now that Knowles has got her fitness standard that we've been talking about, and that's always been something that has been sort of semi-public that she hasn't necessarily always made. But I certainly think the time that she did have on court in this series, she didn't probably live up to the expectations that everyone has had of her, knowing
100%.
that really strong connection that they've had, whether that's because they haven't had the season playing the Mystics together, with Grace obviously out here playing for the Swifts. But yeah, I sort of expected, particularly in that first game, if we circle back to that, that when she came on, I expected her to just break the game open, run, be running rings around Jamie Lee Price in that wing defense position. And it just didn't happen.
I
I don't
think
know what it
to
was, but
quickly
yeah, it just
in
didn't have the same impact.
yeah, to interject, I think I remember when Toyava was last in the Ferns in the Constellation Cup, and everyone was like, "Oh, well, they're winning these games because Toyava's there." But she was playing up against Amy Parmenter
Mm,
most of those games. I think Marinkovic was really trying to see if Parmenter was going to be up to the level of what she's been kind of required to be in that, Diamonds 12 or a consistent threat. And I think not only did that series show that Toyava, well, is an amazing player. Well, she is an amazing player, but if she's
mm,
going up against Jamie Lee Price, that physicality is something that she does struggle against, in which New Zealand teams have been trying to put on her when she's at the Mystics. And I think, but it also showed that Parmenta's maybe not their best option going forward in terms of future selections. I mean, we didn't really get to see much of her in the end either this series. So that does also raise that question of, you mentioned it previously, Australia has some really good first place combinations, seven strong. Their bench when they came on, except from maybe Horges, I think Horges when she came on
mm,
did really well. Um, Otherwise, I don't really remember much impact from the players of like Sarah Clow, Ash Irvin,
mm.
Amy Parmenter, which, in the South Africa series, they came on and they were electric. So I wonder, for Australia to continue to push themselves forward, is that their goal, is to create, once again, the fortress of 12, not the fortress of
Mm.
7.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with you on that one. I think a lot of the players that came on for impact didn't have that desired impact, were a little bit underwhelming. Sarah Clow was definitely one of them. Cara Conan as well. I know there's been a lot of chat about how she had a underwhelming two series really, because even in the South Africa series, she didn't necessarily light the world on fire. I think
Mhm.
Horges came on and had pretty good impact when she was given some court time. Ash Irvin was only in the team for that last test and
Yeah.
wasn't given a huge amount of time, so I'd be reluctant to say anything too mean about her, just because I feel like she wasn't given the chance.
Yeah.
And Tilly Garrett also didn't get a huge amount of court
Yeah.
time either. Sunday was just so dominant in that goal attack, or goal defense bib, sorry. And then Monday just got a nice little holiday. She was on
Yeah,
a second
right.
the whole time. But I think if we're looking at wing attack options for Australia, I'd think Mundy would be sitting behind the likes of Horges and Alice Teague-Neald at the moment.
Yeah.
But I certainly think someone like Cara Conan, her spot for the Com Games next year is potentially at risk. If we've got the likes of, Lucy Austin is hopefully going to be getting a bit more court time this year. And
Mm.
then also like sort of Danelle Wallam coming back over to the Super Netball as well. So I think Conan's going to have a really strong year. On Sophie Dwyer, sorry, is another one that we haven't talked about yet. I think she had really fairly good impact when she came on. But it'll just be probably a fight between her and Horges for that goal attack bib.
Yeah.
And given that extra wing attack coverage that Horges offers, I wouldn't be surprised to see her get the bib over Dwyer heading into the next couple of pinnacle events.
Yeah. And to segue quickly into that series decider time where it was just absolute chaos and it was a very good demonstration, I guess, of what we love about the New Zealand Australian game. I think it was finally the time where, back in the, pre 2022, these games were basically, 5 goal deficits or less every single time. And I
Mm,
think we've seen kind of recently these score lines really blow out. I mean, two 17 goal wins, sorry, for the Australian Diamonds. And then we had a 9 goal, 8 or 9 goal and a 5 goal win for the
mm,
Ferns this series. 2024 was, 4, 10 plus
Mm.
goal wins. So I think what the series decided time, what the positives were that A, it finally gave us a really tight contest. It was really exciting. And I think it really showed, it was a good demonstration of what would happen in a gold medal final for
Mm.
all, because all these players have an A, the Australian Diamonds obviously have been winning world championships and Commonwealth Games gold medals, but they haven't had close tight battles in those stages. So for them, that's probably a new experience for them, which would be a massive gain for their preparations. And I think for the Ferns, they were able to really rebound and push through and get to that, fifth series decider time and also push themselves to keep going. I think though they realized in that game that they necessarily weren't fit enough for it,
Mm.
which was sad, especially after all the emphasis on the fitness standards. Australia ended up winning that 12-11, and the crushing end of that game was, I'm going to
Mm.
say it now, probably my player of the series. I think she was phenomenal in a goal defense for me personally. I really loved, and she was consistent. She was maybe like sometimes her stats didn't necessarily reflect that she was having a massive impact, but it was all the off the ball work and all the work that she was generating for Bruce in the back. Sunday Ariang,
Mm.
really sad to see what happened to her in the end, and it looked like a freak accident basically.
Mm.
There's no fault on any of the players that were involved, but yeah, it was a very terrible way for what was ended up being a great Constellation Cup to end. Um, and I think, yeah, didn't turn over the ball and see the Ferns just look tired. So disappointing way to end, but it was a great series nonetheless. And I think as I said, my player of the series was Sunday Ariang. I'd love to kind of segue into who maybe your player of the series was. And I'm going to challenge you, highlight a New Zealand player as well for a player of the series because I know it will be a diamond.
So, I mean, well, I suppose firstly, Karen Berger was named the official player of the series, which I think
Correct.
she was fantastic in test 3 and 4,
Mm,
but a bit absent in test 1 and 2. And another thing I noted was for a goal defense, wing defense, she has a ridiculously high number of turnovers. I think one of the games
mm.
she had 6 turnovers. That's
That's
the sort
crazy.
of numbers that are questionable for a goal attack or wing attack. A
Mm,
wing defense, goal defense should maybe have 1 or 2. Yes, I know she does a lot of work in attack and bring the ball through court, but that's just not enough. I'm not sorry, that's just not good enough for an international level defender. So I certainly would have had Sunday Ariang up there, but I couldn't go past Kate Maloney. I know I mentioned her at the start. She took away the win for MVP in that first match. She played majority of her time at centre. She had a little time at wing defence in one of the games, but
mm,
across all 4 matches, she spent 8 minutes on the bench.
yeah,
She had 4 turnovers across 4 games,
yeah.
which at an international level centre is just absolutely unreal. She had, but yes, she might have had a fair bit of consistency in the players around her.
Hmm.
But as we said, she was coming up against Maddie Gordon for a lot of this, who I would put as my Kiwi player of the series.
Yeah.
I just think anytime she wasn't on court, you certainly noticed it. And I think something just for that sort of to go back to that series decider time, it was very interesting how each team sort of approached that. You could sort of tell with about 5 minutes to go, Stacey knew that they were going to be going into that time. So she took off Garvin, she took off Bruce just to give them a bit of a chance to rest, be a bit proactive about it so that they could then come on firing for that series decider time
Mm,
versus the Ferns, who, as they were prepping to come back on court, 2 or 3 of their players were cramping, so they weren't able to go out there and
yeah.
start. So they ended up with Kate Heffernan and Maddie Gordon both on the bench for the start of that series decider time. If that's not enough to tell you that their fitness standards need work, I don't know what is. Because
Mm,
you look at the Aussies who were just could have run out. And I've got no doubt that the likes of Garvin and Bruce, which were the 2 players that came off, and I think Watson did as well, actually. I've got no doubt that they would have been able to run out that full period of time if they needed to, given that they had such significant minutes over that. I think that was just Stacey being like, well, we've already lost this bit.
yeah.
Let's save legs, do the right thing and get ready to go for it. And sort of a bit of a probably a tactical mastermind because it then even just gave them a bit of a chance to have a look at the play, see what was happening. All right, how's Grace moving? What's she doing? How can we get around that? What are the defenders doing for Garvin to look at and figure out how she can beat them and even just give them a bit more time to talk tactics as well. So I certainly think that was a really good move on Stacey's behalf. And also just to circle back again to what you'd said about that really nasty injury to Sunday, I think we got a really, really incredible photo from one of our photographers, Graham, that we should be able to include in this, which basically shows all of the Diamonds players huddled around Sunday as she's on the floor and Grace just standing there looking absolutely devastated at what's gone on. And I think it's either Courtney or Jamie are visibly comforting Grace. And I
It's
think that
Courtney.
just goes Courtney, there we go. I knew it was one of them. And I think that just goes to show that yes, it's sport. Yes, they're fierce competitors, but at the end of the day, they really all do care about each other and would never, as you've said, freak accident, no malicious intent or anything like that in it. So I think, yeah, that photo speaks a thousand words about well, not only what sort of a person Grace is, that, she
Mm.
felt some way responsible for what happened, but then also the fact that Courtney was able to sort of remove herself from looking after her friend and teammate Sunday and still offer a bit of consolation for Grace in that moment. So yeah, I think that's a really, really special shot that we've got from one of our amazing photographers, Graham.
Yeah, and I think in a sad way for Sunday, but for the game of netball, it really showed that not only, this was a great series, but they're all fierce competitors and they're all super exciting generation of netball I think we've got to come. I think it really translated that, they're all very young players. I think there's not many
Mm,
players that you would be expecting to be, I think only like a couple would be retiring from the New Zealand side. I think the Diamonds, you'll have a few, but they've got such an
mm,
exciting generation underneath them that are going to immediately snap up those positions and run with them for 10, 12, 15
mm.
years, who knows. So I think, yeah, it was definitely a devastating way to end, but a great series nonetheless. And I think now that as we segue into other international series this year for the Ferns, I think Diamonds currently have no confirmed test series. So the Ferns will be going over and starting their campaign against Scotland, which should be coming, which is actually today of our recording, pending when this
Mm.
comes out, but also we'll be going up against the England Roses as well, which is going to be a very, very exciting series.
So yeah, that's the wrap about Constellation Cup. As Toby mentioned, we've got two series coming up for New Zealand up in the Northern Hemisphere, which are going to be really exciting. So we'll be back to wrap those up once they've all played out. So make sure you keep an eye across all of our socials for any of the content related to those. And yeah, we'll be back just before Christmas to wrap up netball for 2026. Sorry, for 2025. Already a year ahead of me.
She's
And
already
leading into
exhausting us
2026.
and aging us already. We'd love to see it. Thank you, Georgia, for coming on today.
No worries. We'll see you next time.